paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
You want answers. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
So you've got some questions you'd like to ask me. Let's switch our roles here.
Okay. So
you came across the Franklin scandal and it kind of changed the way you looked at things.
Well, actually, I changed the way I looked at things, then came across the Franklin scandal in that order. So I had the pedophilia story has always been in the background. You know, you read about the church and stuff like that. And the church stories didn't interest me because I said, okay, if the job description is you either give up sex or do something weird, you're going to draw in some iffy characters potentially, and therefore, and the fact that they covered up, again, nothing there. But I began to wonder why I saw so many people in the world doing things in leadership positions that made no sense. What is it gets a person to do something that is so against our most foundational principles? And I began to wonder if it was tied to these pedophile networks as a vehicle to control them. And you know, I've had conversations with intel guys and stuff like that. And I asked one who I was on a Zoom call with, I said, I'm interested in this topic, which I actually gave a talk to my Zoom group on this topic. But it was it's still simmering in the crock pot. So I haven't written anything. But I asked an intel guy, I said, Tony, and I fact checked him. He was very real, very connected. He was Department of Defense intel. And I said, Tony, I'm interested in the role of pedophilia in geopolitics, its influence on geopolitics. And he starts talking about Epstein, of course, right? And Epstein may be the biggest part of the story, but I don't think so. I think Epstein's a superficial part of the story, although he certainly had influence on hugely important figures in geopolitics. And so I sort of stopped him. I said, no, I'm interested in the layers below that, the deeper, darker stuff. We had, through our Zoom group even, we had Carlo Vigani. He's like third in the Vatican. My wife, I'm doing coffee for her. Oh, there's the lunch I didn't eat. I'm putting a microwave on you here. We had Carlo Vigani, something like third in the Vatican. And he was calling out the leaders of the world as being run by pedophile networks. I mean, unbelievably straightforward statements. He's the guy who called out the Vatican for covering up the pedophilia in the church and stuff like that. And assembling this narrative, and where it takes you into the darkest places. So the Franklin surf scandal is the most definitive treatise on this topic, although as you know,
screen
it's just
is kind of freezing on me. Oh, there you go. Your screen kind of froze on me.
Yeah, could be I'm sitting next to a microwave oven. That might be telling us I've got a 2-minute microwaving going on here. Maybe it's sending signals. So I got on the Franklin scandal fast, and then I found it compelling, and I thought you did a masterful job. To me, and tell me where I'm wrong about your book. To me, the message of the book is that here's a scandal that busted in the open to an unusual extent. right? This is one where it started to really unfold. And as you know, they hired an investigator who ended up dying in a fiery plane crash, and just all sorts of things that you'd predict. But the real message was, to me, was that as this thing unfolded, and it was a national network, but I couldn't tell if it was a big network or just to me, it's the Rosetta Stone, though. It's not a big stone, but it's the Rosetta Stone. Was the response of the authorities. That's what the story of the Franklin scandal is. And as I describe victims of the pedophilia networks, they're broken individuals. They're trying to reassemble their lives. They're reassembling multiple personalities back to a manageable number. They're crackheads sometimes. They're amazingly, some of them are now married and sort of somehow existing. But I'd say a half a dozen of them really step forward, and then the FBI shows up and crushes them. And then the courts step up and crush them. And this one hero, who I can't remember her name, ends up in the Nebraska Supreme Court.
Alicia Owen.
And she loses. But the amazing part of that was the judge wasn't even a legal Supreme Court judge, and the prosecutor and the judge seemed to be in cahoots to destroy her. She ends up going to jail. The parole committee let her out first request, which was almost unprecedented. They smelled a rat. Now, if you look at the statistics, so then I think what inspired me to start getting serious was the Sound of Freedom, because that movie, that is a complicated story in itself, is my understanding. So you got Ballard, who goes down to save the kids, and apparently there's a lot of factual liberties taken.
And Ballard isn't the most ethical guy. He's had his difficulties.
Exactly. And in fact, what I sense is that what the story has in it is a truthful story, but for which Ballard recognized opportunity. That's how I would describe it. He saw the grift. He went through my Dr. Zoom group. That gives you how. But I got locked out and I couldn't actually be there. So I had to watch the replay because trolls showed up. And so they just locked it down. And then I just had to listen. But he was trying to raise money for the sequel, and something was wrong with that story, stuff like that. So I think the Ballard story is a true story told by a guy who's trying to make a lot of money and a lot of headway on it. And he's got affiliations with people that he shouldn't have affiliations with and stuff like that. But that's what got me sort of going. Now, here's the problem that I have. And the problem that I have is in the world of separating fact from fiction in the modern era, it's almost impossible, right? This particular topic, separating fact from fiction, is an extraordinary challenge. What I tell people who think I've gone nuts is I say, go look at any of these organizations that tell you how big the problem is, and they will all agree with a huge error bar that it's somewhere between like 500,000 and 10 million kids a year being trafficked, and that they say 60% are being trafficked for sex, and then there's organ harvesting. There's all these different horrible things. But then I like to say, can you name a person? We see images of kids occasionally getting saved. We see images of traffickers. There's always some South American guy who looks bad, and they don't look like the Clinton Foundation. They don't look like Laura Silsby. I'm sure that name rings a bell.
I know the Laura Silsby story well.
I know. I'm sure you do. Do you ever not say things? And so we've got vast numbers of kids being trafficked. Can you identify a single person who's been caught receiving the children? And they do exist, but they're rare.
There's guys getting busted living in trailer parks.
But those aren't the guys.
Yes.
Though.
I mean, the thing about child trafficking, it happens in every socioeconomic strata. But with Epstein, we know who a lot of those perpetrators are. And we
we absolutely do.
And we know who a number of the procurers are.
Right.
And that is our government protecting a political system.
Mm-hmm. But then you get to things like Hollywood, for example, looks like it's rife with pedophilia that is way beyond casting couch level, right? So some 17-year-old girl with stars in her eyes and some guy like Harvey Weinstein bangs her, right? That's the sort of the image of Hollywood's problem. But I think it's much deeper, much more broadly based. And then you start hearing who the bad guys are, and they are some very, very famous people. And of course, you'd say, well, that guy can't be. Like Tom Hanks gets hammered. And you go, well, that can't be. And you go, well, Bill Cosby was everyone's hero too, and look what happened to him. So don't be so quick to let someone off the hook. But it's almost always guilt by association. How do you separate fact from fiction when you're and I don't have boots on the ground. I don't have an investigator. I'm not interviewing people directly, although I'm going to, because I've got some connections through Twitter, and I'm setting up phone calls with them.
I got into Epstein in 2012.
Okay.
So I got into Epstein before just about anybody. The Palm Beach Post was running articles on Jeffrey Epstein.
Right.
And he at that point, he was a lone pedophile. And
right.
The Franklin scandal was published 2009, 2010.
Oh, is that right? It's that old? I didn't know that.
And I came across Epstein, and the Franklin scandal was pretty devastating to me on multiple levels. Emotional, financial. I put a lot of money into it. We couldn't get anybody to buy it initially. And then I started hearing this stuff about Epstein, and I thought, I got to go check it out. So I went down to Florida, and then I was able to score the Black Book. And
remind me the Black Book. Oh, Epstein's Black Book.
Yeah, I was able to get Epstein's Black Book, which had been confiscated.
How many names are on that? I've seen what appears to be the Black Book, but I don't even know if it is the Black Book.
At this point, it's all over the internet.
That's right.
But Alfredo Rodriguez, Epstein's house manager, stole it from him. And then he tried to sell it to one of the attorneys that was filing civil lawsuits against Epstein. And the lawyer went to the FBI, and the FBI did a sting. And that's ultimately, I got the Black Book through someone who had gotten it from the FBI. And then I immediately started calling victims. There's like 200 victims in the Black Book. And I started calling victims, and they started telling me about being flown around.
Right.
And then I realized,
and this is familiar territory to you.
It's very familiar territory for me, but it's also showed me that this is a network. This isn't a lone pervert in Palm Beach. This is a network. And then I brought the Black Book back to New York, and I pitched it to as many people as I could pitch. When I was pitching Franklin, at that point, I had access to a lot of publishers and a lot of editors. And I had a pretty strong agent. And I was getting in, and I was talking to these guys about Franklin, and I could just see the cognitive dissonance. Well, do you think they were sincerely suffering cognitive dissonance, or were you getting stonewalled? I think for the most part, what was going on with them is, this is a horrible story. We need to help Nick Bryant, or else I can just write Nick Bryant off as crazy, and then I don't even have to worry about this, and I can have a nice dinner with my family tonight. I think that was good. But I know that some of those guys believed me, for sure. I know that absolutely. And they still blew you off. They just didn't want to touch it. And after rejection, I ultimately got it published. The Franklin scandal published to a small publisher on the West Coast. Did you sell a lot of copies? I don't know. The thing about it is, we're selling more now than we've ever sold before. Epstein was a huge boost. Right. Because Epstein is kind of a carbon copy of the Franklin scandal.
Now, is the Epstein really just a surface of a much bigger scandal? Because if you take his black book, right, you take his network of people, and the people, not only, people tend to look at the flight manifest and think that those are the problems. Oh, he had condos and stuff. He had all sorts of stuff. The picture of Ehud Barak coming out of his townhouse and stuff like that. So Epstein's list of clients who were compromised, what do you think the number is? 1,000? What do you think?
The Franklin network, I'm extrapolating, was in business for 10 to 12 years.
Okay.
It was a bigger network than Epstein's, but Epstein's network was intact for 25 years. So I think that both of them destroyed the same number.
It may have been an extension of a pre-existing network, right? So Epstein.
You can go to my website or actually my podcast, and I talk about a huge network out of Detroit that got covered up. It was huge. Right. So, and because I've been at this for 22 years, I've come across people who I believe. I mean, when people approach me, I get a lot of crazy stuff, but then I get a lot of people that
I even do. I can't imagine what you get. I cannot imagine what you get.
Some guy sent me 9 emails yesterday. And I started to read one, and I just said, well, this guy needs some, I think, psychiatric medication. And I don't have anything against people taking psychiatric medication. I just want you to
Right.
But when Alexander Acosta, when the bullshit grand jury said that Epstein hadn't molested a single child, and that grand jury testimony was released about a month ago, and I read it, and there was one victim. She had been 14 and she was testifying when she was 16, and she was skewered by the special prosecutor. It's very easy to corrupt a grand jury. All you need is to corrupt the special prosecutor. And she was treated like she was a prostitute. I mean, she was 14 years old, and that grand jury didn't indict Epstein on a single count of child abuse. And then Michael Ryder, who is a real hero in this story, he was chief of the Palm Beach Police Department. He just detonated and became very, very vociferous. And the feds said that they would look into it, but then Alexander Acosta was told that Epstein was an intelligence asset. And
I remember that part of that story, yeah.
And then he had to back away. So I believe what we're looking at is a political system that's perfidious. And there was a congressman from Tennessee, a federal congressman, Tim Burchett, and he came out in December and said a bunch of my colleagues are compromised in honey traps.
Right.
There's a lot of ways to compromise people, but
trivial number.
But and I think politicians, these guys are highly sexed alpha males, and they're arrogant.
Right. So you start out with just some bimbo, and he doesn't want to break up his family, so you've already got him, and then next thing you know, you just start working it. You just go deeper and deeper, right?
Well, nothing makes people stupid like sex and arrogance. I mean,
right.
And our politicians have those. So with the political system, I think it's predicated on blackmail. So yes, Epstein is a symptom of something that's much deeper. And there are a number of, I believe, networks like Epstein's. And I've been told, now I've been digging into Epstein for 12 years. I've been told that Epstein actually had an understudy. I haven't been able to find the guy. I don't know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me if Epstein had an understudy. And I have no idea. There were so many things that were crazy that were going on with him. I believe there was a victim named Juliette Bryant, and she was on his New Mexico ranch, and she came to, and she was in a laboratory, and there was a doctor harvesting her ovums, and she's a sweet person. I mean, this is what Epstein and Maxwell did. And that's one thing. I mean, the media likes to talk about the salaciousness. That's all they talk about. But you can't really, I mean, traffickers are vicious people, regardless if they're regardless if they're in a trailer park or they're living in a Fifth Avenue mansion. Traffickers are vicious people. So she said that her ovens are good, and you know how easy it is to clone somebody. I mean, it would be relative. I guess it's estimated that it would cost like $1.5 million to clone.
To clone a person?
To clone a person, yeah.
So the sheep experiment, the Geron experiment. Yeah.
Dolly
Dolly.
If you can clone Dolly, you can clone a human being. I mean, it's not
right.
Difficult. And actually, people are cloning their French bulldogs for like $60,000. So it's
really,
yeah. You can clone your French bulldog.
That got further than I thought. I haven't been paying attention. I got to watch this stuff.
That's what I said. So I think that there are other tentacles beyond the total corruption of our political system. Because when Dolly got cloned, I thought to myself, there's got to be billionaire megalomaniacs out there that are cloning themselves. There just has to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that there's little Jeffrey, kind of like the boys from Brazil. I'm sure that there's little Jeffrey Epsteins running around somewhere. But where it really gets is when the cover up. So the government quashed any real investigation into the cover up, and the mainstream media wanted nothing to do with any kind of, no one in the mainstream media is called for justice. But then you've got the attorneys that have come in. Some of those attorneys are good guys, but you've got guys like David Boies and Stanley Pottinger who are really dirty guys.
See, I didn't know about Boies until recently. I thought he was one of the good guys or something. Yeah, okay.
So with Boies, he's one of the architects of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. And 225 women have applied for compensation, 150 women have been awarded compensation, and 8 have declined. And we have no idea what the criteria is. That's
hush money.
That's been completely opaque. But if you get money from that fund, you sign an NDA.
Right.
And you can't go after anybody else.
Right.
Any of your, and I've spoken at a lot of conferences, child trafficking conferences. I've been at this for quite some time, and I've met some very prominent psychologists and psychiatrists that deal with dissociative identity disorder. And there's a very eminent psychologist I know who had a client that she believes was trafficked by Epstein when she was under 10 years old.
Right.
And she helped her client fill out all the paperwork, and the client had definitive information about Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
And she was rebuffed. And I know another psychologist who had a client who she feels was under 10 when she was trafficked by Epstein. And she was rebuffed too by the fund, because the cover story is that even that these kids were 14 years old or older, even though some of them that have received.
Right. And I think the reason is because when you see a picture of, say, Bill Clinton getting a back rub, you go, well, Clinton's a dirtball, which we know. And I happen to be one of the quite a large number of people who believe that to know the Clintons is to risk getting whacked. But when you see him getting a back rub, you look at the girl and you go, okay, so he's a sleazeball, obviously, and she could be underage, but you're not to be having sex with a 17-year-old is very different than having sex with a 5-year-old. And most people can get past the yuck factor of an old man having sex with a 17-year-old. They can't get past the 5-year-old. So they have to keep the girls looking older.
Well, the other thing is, you've got, as I said earlier, traffickers are vicious. And these guys are psychopaths. Like King of the Franklin Network,
mm-hmm.
He liked pubescent boys. And
is he dead now? No,
I
can't remember.
I just got a picture of him. walking around Omaha. He lives in Virginia, but he was, and actually kind of went viral. I put a picture of him. And one of the things that, and Epstein was a psychopath. I mean, if you wanted a 10-year-old, these guys did not have a problem getting you a 10-year-old. I mean, that's
right.
And they're protected by our intelligence. Whenever the CIA has its national security trump card, which has obviously protected King and also protected Epstein. And what I find remarkable is King has inveigled himself into 3 groups that would give him access to children.
Right.
The first one was Granville Academy, and I looked into that, and it's not even a school. It takes children on lower socioeconomic children on field trips, and I thought that's a bad idea. So I got him kicked.
I've read about this one. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
Got him booted out of that, and then he ended up on the Washington Redskins event committee, and I got him booted out of that. And then he ended up in Opera Nova, which teaches lower socioeconomic. One of the things that it does is teach lower socioeconomic children how to sing. And I got him kicked out of that. But what's really troubling is there are people in the government that know that he's a great white shark. He's a super predator. And it's up to a writer to protect
the kids
from a super predator. I mean, it's so insane.
So there are some very outspoken people. One of the things that makes me a little nervous about this topic, and actually I've got several people who know me well who warn me to tread softly, is risk. Do you ever feel a sense of risk?
I had one death threat very early on, and I've had a lot of strange phone calls. I've been followed in Nebraska. There has been a certain amount of
How about legal risk?
Well, with the Franklin scandal, I published sealed grand jury testimony and also sealed exhibits. But I figured my thinking on that was, this is just so evil that if they want to arrest me, they can arrest me. I mean, that's how I felt about it. But I believe that my adversaries, that dark malignant corner of intelligence that does this type of thing, didn't think I could get all the information that I got and didn't think I could get the book published. And Wikipedia just hammers on this.
Well, Wikipedia is a total cutout for the CIA, FBI. I mean, it's just terrible.
Absolutely.
I mean, just ask Larry Sanger. Larry Sanger and I've had a few exchanges, and he basically says it's anything remotely political. Wikipedia is, it's not just worthless, which we all know because you go read about it and you go, well, that's garbage. But it is specifically monitored at all times by the intelligence guys.
Well, especially sites like the Franklin child abuse allegations, because that is the one thing that...
Yeah, your book is a hoax, according to Wikipedia.
Yeah. And there's children eating feces and things like that. The one thing that could wake up Americans and unite Americans is our government trafficking children or our government protecting child traffickers. I think that is the one thing that could wake people up. And I started an organization called Epstein Justice. You can go to epsteinjustice.com. And that young girl, Alicia Owen, who was put in solitary for 2 years and still wouldn't recant. And
yeah, she is a real hero in the story. I mean, she's a superhero.
She is the associate director of Epstein Justice.
Oh, interesting.
She's turned out to be an amazing individual. I mean, something like that will either make you an amazing individual or it will
destroy you. Yeah, one of the two.
And her inner strength is pretty amazing. But I think that Epstein, Franklin, the curtain is lifted up a little bit and we get to see just how rotten and perfidious the system is. That's what was being protected with Franklin. That's what's being protected with Epstein.
I'm worried that there's some sort of limited hangout, as they like to say. I don't know where all these terms come from, but where they're playing a role like, there's people who say that Trump's not what he appears to be. We shouldn't go there, but that he really is part of the whole game, and that he's not, and I understand the case. But so someone like, and I don't know if you want me to name names or not, but I watch someone like Liz Crocken, who's out there every day smacking away, saying the most openly antagonistic things against these guys. And I watch and I think, I even wonder, why is she still walking the face of the earth? And then when I can't answer that question, then I get worried that maybe I'm misreading this whole scenario, and I don't know who to trust. And so, like, on Twitter, there's a guy named Gray, and he at one point was talking about being a victim, and somehow, because of my attempts to understand this, he followed me, we connected, and I said, look, I want to have a chat. So a little bit of investigative journalism. I've noticed recent things he's been posting. He appears to come out as he might be a victim, but if that's true, he also is part of the sort of the PSYOP system that this is founded upon. And so I'm worried that I don't understand. I really don't understand the game I'm playing, and that I could end up in a ridiculous situation, as in, like, I got completely duped. Well, but things like Pizzagate it's got satanic shit all over it.
Here's the thing with Pizzagate. I really dug into Pizzagate. Please tell me. Good. So I dug into Epstein, and I came out with this black book. And also, I was the guy that put up the Passenger Manifest too. I dug into Pizzagate, and I could not find corroboration. I made it to the guy who could give me corroboration, who I felt could give me corroboration, but he ultimately decided not to meet with me. So one thing about philosophy is it's taught me to be agnostic until I can find evidence one way or the other. I haven't been able to find evidence. Now, those emails are certainly very bizarre. And
there's no question.
And
the fear I have is everyone's citing the same source.
But I looked into it really hard, and I know this universe very well.
I know.
And I could not walk away with any kind of evidence. Now, that
no
doesn't
smoking
mean
gun. No smoking gun.
That doesn't mean there's not evidence. That means I didn't find it. But I'm good at finding this type of stuff. But again, I spent a lot of, I came to the conclusion that with my sources that QAnon was bogus at best. And I think that has been proven to be right.
When you said, okay, let me just pull back on that one. I get the sense that QAnon started out semi-legitimately as a bunch of maybe intelligence guys went rogue, and then it has become bogus. Is that a way to think about it?
I don't know. I mean, that's entirely possible, but I don't know. I mean, QAnon could have been an op from the beginning.
Right.
You got to keep in mind that Epstein was emerging, and it was a perfect time for a QAnon to come into being because of Epstein. With Pizzagate, I'm always receptive to reevaluating, but I just wasn't able to find any evidence.
So if you were handed the answer key, I think an answer key is all the time. I said, okay, just give me the answer now. I've found everything I can. How right? I've written about Ukraine. I've written about a lot of topics that I start from scratch and then dig in. And then at the end, I think I've got the picture. I'm fairly comfortable with my analysis of the Ukrainian war. And when I wrote it, I felt alone. and basically I came down on the side of Putin, said he made his best play, and NATO wanted this war and he couldn't avoid it, so he threw the first punch. And but in this stuff, so if you had to bet a paycheck, Pizzagate real or not, if you just had to bet based on this ambivalence,
I would have to say that I'm agnostic.
okay, so you'd say it's a coin toss.
And as I said, if I thought that I got to a guy that could answer my questions, but for whatever reason, he decided not to meet with me. We were going to meet. And after that, then the path just went fallow, and I wasn't able to get any kind of corroboration. And I'm very good at going into that universe. So I don't know what to make of Pizzagate. I just don't.
Okay, so
I believe that QAnon is bullshit. I don't know what to make of Pizzagate.
Hollywood,
Well,
casting couch aside, and the sort of the drugs and the the fast living and stuff like that, is Hollywood, you can paint a picture of it being just a den of pedophiles. Is that, in your opinion, accurate? Or
I think that there's a lot of them. I mean, the Franklin Network was pandering kids to people in LA.
But they have their own source.
They've got their own source, but sometimes it's like Craig Spence, King and Spence. Spence had his own source for children. King was plundering Boys Town for children and getting runaways that fell through the cracks. But they could not get enough children. And I wrote a book called Confessions of a DC Man and the Politics of Sex, Lies, Blackmail with a guy named Henry Vincent, who ran a gay escort service. And King and Spence were pressuring him to provide them with children. And he wouldn't do that. So it's almost like an insatiable demand. But I think that the people in Hollywood and I think that the people in Washington, D.C. have a lot of similarities.
The sociopathy,
the drive. I think they're my forays into Hollywood have been extremely inauspicious. So maybe I have a jaundiced eye towards that, but yeah, I think that there's a lot of sociopaths running around Hollywood, as there are a lot of sociopaths running around Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so I've read a couple of books on sociopathy, and people think that the prisons must be filled with sociopaths, when in fact the prisons are not statistically anomalous. So those are people who were born on the wrong side of the tracks and got themselves in trouble and stuff like that. The CEOs are non-statistically sociopathic. Anyone who can benefit from not playing by the rules has got a leg up. And so the sociopaths come in all different shapes and sizes too. They're not all just Ted Bundys.
There has been a number of survivors that have come forth with books, and their stories are out there. Are they true? Are they not? They're dealing with DID.
DID? What's that?
Dissociative identity disorder.
Right.
I mean, all of them have that.
Right.
I mean, that's a major.
They're broken individuals, right?
Commonality. Well, yes, the DID, but I have met people with DID that have been able to cut and paste very good lives together too.
Right.
It's a very interesting disorder. But what I found out when I was getting into Franklin, I was telling my friends what I was finding. And some of them became estranged from them. They did not.
I have no trouble imagining. That.
They did not want to believe what I was saying. And then my friends that were willing to believe what I was saying. If they were a Democrat, I would talk about Republicans being compromised, and they'd be down with that. But then if I talked about Democrats being compromised,
Right.
then
Right.
And the same thing was true with Republicans. I know what that is like. And these stories are wild, and they're very, very difficult to prove. But when you get into this world, it's such a different, it's a parallel universe.
So the problem is this particular story shatters your worldview. To find out some politicians on the take or whatever from China or whatever, that doesn't shatter your worldview. These stories shatter your worldview because I'll look at, for example, a parent with kids, and I'll go, I can't fathom the parent doing to those kids what you read about parents doing to kids, right?
Well, it's a huge problem. I mean, according to the Centers for Disease Control, and these are conservative numbers, 25% of underage girls have been molested and 5% of underage boys. And the percentage
Those are huge numbers.
The percentage of underage boys is way underreported, but just with those conservative numbers, you've got 50 million people that were sexually abused as minors.
Right.
It's very endemic in our society. And there is a organization called Project Lighthouse that estimates that 300,000 children are trafficked in the United States a year. And people think that it's like Mexican children and Eastern European children. The majority of, and these numbers are difficult because it's hard to corroborate them, but I believe that the vast majority of children that are trafficked in the United States are American children, up to 85%.
Really? Because I had thought I'd picked up the exact opposite story. Maybe I'm biased by one interview of a European trafficker, and they asked him, and he seemed like he was trying to tell the story. His face was covered, you know, you didn't know who he was. And he suggested that when you traffic a kid, grab a kid off the street, you get way more problems than it's worth in the United States, and that it's a lot easier to go to some godforsaken place and bring them into the country.
They have to be socialized. I mean, that's what Boys Town was doing. You cannot take a kid off the street and throw him into...
You groom the kid. You groom the kid.
And Boys Town already was doing that. So they were the perfect victims. But these guys that traffic these kids, they know how to groom these kids. Super predators like King and Epstein, these guys are very good at what they do.
Well, so, and as I've said, I read a book about brainwashing that focused on brainwash. It's an older book, much older book, and talked about, you know, Marines in the Korean War who got brainwashed and stuff like that. And it clicked immediately that if you can brainwash a Marine, you can brainwash a 5-year-old, right? And so what struck me as very surreal is that a lot of these kids that are trafficked into the system are trafficked in by their parents.
Their parents, foster parents, large institutions. With Boys Town, the number 2 guy at Boys Town was Father James Kelly. And he had molested all kinds of kids in upstate New York. And the Catholic Church, in its infinite wisdom, put him in Boys Town. And I wasn't even looking for people that were molested by Father Kelly. I was looking for people that were part of King's network. And I found like 6 victims of Father Kelly. And I believe that he was a mechanism for King to get kids out of Boys Town. Really a malignant character.
So when I read your book, the one thing that I thought came in a little light, that's not a criticism, but just rather something I would have happily read more chapters on, was you talk about them being trafficked to cities and places like that. But again, I had a terrible I want to know. I want to know what happens when they get there and who these recipients are, and that's very hard to get, right? That's the thing. So when you talk about, sort of into a trailer park, you go the trouble of stealing a kid. I don't think you're going to sell it to some guy who's can't rub two nickels together, right? I think they're going to people of wealth and power, right?
Absolutely. Rusty Nelson, who was one of the blackmail photographers for the Franklin Network, I've used this analogy a number of times. He said that once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht. It's a beautiful yacht and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything you want on the yacht.
But you can't get off the yacht.
But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown.
Right.
I think that's the conundrum that people get into once they're compromised. They just got to go with it, and they've got
to get you on the yacht requires a fairly innocuous thing. Again, so you start out with a 25-year-old hot blonde chick, and then you get that gets you entry to the yacht, and then do you think it's true that they actually get guys to do things that they simply wouldn't do because they say, "Look, we own you now. We're going to film you with this 5-year-old boy"? Do they
No,
just
I don't
put a
think
gun
that's
to
the
their
case.
head?
Once someone is blackmailed, they're part of the club. It's omerta, as the mafia used to say.
Right.
And
right.
one thing that I've noticed about them is they generally vote for their constituency. But markers are called in occasionally.
Right.
Where they have to vote against their constituency. And that happens quite a bit.
What's also true is if you're a non-compromised politician, but Washington is littered with compromised politicians, you have friends, colleagues, important connections. They say, look, you have to vote this way or I'm screwed. Right. So the pressure comes sort of secondhand because, you might be Marjorie Taylor Greene and not a pedophile. I'm guessing she's not, just for laughs. But when some high-ranking Republican who she does want to be in good with says, look, you gotta vote this way, the pressure gets serious because he's being told you're toast if you don't get her to cross over.
Oh, an example of that is Dennis Hastert.
Oh, Hastert's a great example. He's the only guy who's ever been caught, best I can tell.
Well, he's the only guy that's ever been prosecuted.
Right. Yeah. So caught happens a lot. Right.
So I think with Hastert, because he was a pederast going back 40 years, 50 years.
Right. Right.
And there were a lot of victims in his wake. And he was Speaker of the House, and he was a strong arm specialist when he was Speaker of the House.
Oh, I didn't know much about him as a politician.
He was a strong arm specialist. And he was Speaker of the House for 7 years. So he was heavily compromised. And actually the FBI, there's a FBI whistleblower named Sibel Edmonds, who has said that the FBI knew about Hastert when Hastert was Speaker of the House. Why was Hastert taken down? I think he got too greedy. And
yeah,
I think he told some people to fuck off that he shouldn't have told.
There was a Chicago politician, I can't remember his name, who got put in prison for embezzling $27,000 worth of postage. And I'm thinking, you don't go to jail for embezzling $27,000 worth of postage. There's something else there. But none of these guys ever seem to go to prison, right?
Hastert is the only one.
He did.
And I got his cell phone number, but he doesn't seem inclined to talk to me.
I'm shocked. This is my shock face you're seeing. So I also happen to have read a book. I'm interested in MK Ultra, which I thought was fake. And then I discovered that, no, it was a above the fold scandal, Dave. You were totally wrong on that. But at first I thought it was probably where you dump all the stuff you don't understand. But no, it's very real. And when you read about these trafficked kids, the adults, there's a site called 50 Voices, where there's 50 people who describe their personal experience. And a decent percentage of those, they're describing MK Ultra, right? They're describing the experiments that are being done on them, not just pervs.
It's not really experiments anymore. I think it's down to a fine art.
Okay.
And if you want a really good resource for that is the Extreme Abuse Survey. Google
The what is it again?
Extreme Abuse Survey.
Okay.
And that was put together by 4 researchers, 2 American, 2 German. And one had been a victim of mind control. And she was able to get a number of people to come forward. There's 1,200 people that answered a lot of questions about their abuse and how they've recovered.
Oh, so that's like 1,200 voices.
And it's
okay.
very, very, I mean, all that data together is pretty powerful, I think, because they all can't be lying. You know, I mean,
Right. Well, so like the McMartin scandal, that was my first exposure to this problem. And I remember at the time thinking that it was strange because I had this image of pedophiles as soloists. Because I thought, well, you know, if you told your friend that you're a pedophile, how do you know he's not going to rat you out? And I didn't realize at that time that the networks are what provide the security, not the soloists. But at the time I remember thinking it wasn't right. There's something odd about an entire daycare facility that were pedophiles. Something just struck me as that can't be. And then years later, supposedly, and this is as I experienced it, not as I believe it to be true. I'm about to ask you how right or wrong I was. The kids as adults were beat to shit. I mean, they were troubled individuals. There were some suicides. There's some kids who came up and said, you know, I lied, and so the scandal seemed to repackage itself into a, and then it got, what's the name of that term where the panic, the something panic? What's it called? Satanic panic?
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
And they I thought, oh, okay, so now it makes sense that these were kids who got talked into ratting out the daycare. But then I read about it more carefully recently, and you know, tunnels under the daycare, and you know, the tunnels. You find tunnels under someone's house.
There was a UCLA geologist that found what he believed was tunnels. I've done a podcast and also written a blog on McMartin. And
so what do you think is the outcome? Yeah.
Ray Bucky definitely molested those kids.
Okay.
I don't know if other people with McMartin molested those kids, but I definitely know he did. I've got no
okay. So it's real at some level.
Yeah. It's entirely possible that others could have been involved. I don't know. The woman that was the psychologist that was interviewing the children, there was so much malfeasance there and leading and
intentional intent.
No, she just there hadn't really been anything like that before, and she was over her head real quickly.
Got it.
And she was like pressuring kids to say things. Like, and the thing that I know about McMartin is Ray Bucky is a child molester. I've got no doubts about that.
So is he still in prison?
No, he never got put in prison.
So here's one I believe has gotten backwards, and maybe it's I have faith in the guy presenting the case maybe more than I should, but and that is the Sandusky case. So a guy named John Ziegler has been saying Sandusky got totally railroaded.
I don't think that Sandusky got railroaded, but what's entirely possible is that I talked to, there was that district attorney named Roy Bryant that disappeared.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
I don't know. I don't know about this.
He was a district attorney and he just disappeared. I mean, he had part of a computer, his personal computer, that was found in a lake or something like that. But yeah, but I talked to one of his underlings, and she told me that she felt there was definitely a network there. Absolutely.
that Sandusky was doing bad things.
Was part of a network.
But you could imagine some old man just not realizing, hey, you can't do that, right? And Ziegler seems to think that Sandusky was just naive in that sense, and that he really liked kids in the right way, and that once Penn State settled, then people came out of the woodwork to get their cut. That's what his view is.
I don't believe that at all. There are kids that have come forward. There was one that was being molested by Sandusky in his basement, and his wife was upstairs and the kid was screaming. But he had that Second Mile Foundation. And there was an infamous pedophile named Eddie Savitz that was involved in that Second Mile Foundation.
I've heard of Eddie Savitz.
I believe that Sandusky was part of a network, and there's no upside. You're not going to be able to make a deal if you're part of a network. They're going to put you away in prison. I mean, if you don't want your family murdered and left resourceless,
you just have to suck it up, right?
Yeah, like King did and Maxwell is doing now.
Exactly.
The thing about both Epstein and Craig Spence, who was the DC part of the Franklin scandal, is they had way too much media attention on them.
Right.
And once that happens, you're worthless.
Then you got to go. Then you got to go. Then you got to go.
But you're worthless as a blackmailer. You're not going to be able to blackmail people.
Right.
And at a certain point, that media made them expendable.
Okay.
People approach me all the time, and they want me to look at this, and they want me to look at that. And I say to them, I'm just one guy.
Well, you should set up a network. But guys like Edison, and they did have, they had, Da Vinci, all these guys, they had helpers and stuff like that. And so you could imagine, I think it was the octopus murders, the octopus murders.
The Danny Casolaro.
Exactly. And Danny gets killed. And then his brother asks, what was Danny following, and tries to follow up on it. And at the end, he runs into several people who got on the same scent, got the same trail independently. And one of them was a woman, and she said something profound. She said, I just had to make the decision to stop. And it's one of those, you can dig down a rabbit hole until you're just so deep.
I know you're talking about Sherry Seymour.
Yeah, I wouldn't remember her name, but yeah.
I believe that one of the reasons I'm alive, I was very smart about Franklin. Whenever I get anything, I would replicate it and
spread it
to the four winds.
Daniel Ellsberg. That's what he did.
I think that the people that killed Danny Casolaro thought, well, he's just an investigative journalist. He's freelance. We can kill him. There's not going to be any blowback. And there was huge blowback. And
there was? I didn't know there was.
The blowback, Vanity Fair had to do a hatchet job on Danny Casolaro. Essentially saying he was delusional. A guy named Ron Rosenbaum, who likes to do hatchet jobs. I do not think that he has the greatest motives. But because Vanity Fair and some other mainstream media did a hatchet job on Danny Casolaro, that kind of indicated to me, because usually he would just be ignored. That's the way that the media plays it. But there was such a critical mass that there had to be some kind of response from the mainstream media on Danny Casolaro.
Well, so if you're let's say you're running a brainwashing program, you can't do experiments on lab rats.
I think the technology that's developed now is so far beyond experimentation. I really do believe that people can be dissociated and given,
Right.
different alters, and those alters can be programmed through
Right.
hypnosis and drugs. I believe
Right.
that. I believe that 100% at this point.
So I read the book Chaos about Charles Manson.
Yeah, I
People
like
kept
that
saying
one.
you gotta read it. And at first, when I started it, I'm going, okay, they're sending me down a rabbit hole on this one. But by the end, they made the convincing story, and when they connected it back with MK Ultra and Jolly West, right? If Jolly West is in the plot, you've got a problematic plot, right? And I asked, I think it's O'Neill was the author,
Tom O'Neill.
Tom O'Neill. The one thing I didn't understand, maybe you can tell me since you like the book, is he was getting the door slammed in his face a lot when he asked. And it didn't, as I read it, I didn't hear him saying, people were just, they didn't want to go back and revisit that. And, it's too painful, blah, blah, blah. I read it as he was getting door slammed in his face, which I interpreted as evidence that these are Hollywood people who really knew something and didn't want to say anything and wanted the guy to get the hell out. And I didn't think he tied that together well at the end, where I was left with but you talked to a lot of people slamming the door in their face, and I didn't think he explained why all these Hollywood types were giving him a serious get out of my face response. And I asked him in an email, I think, and he said, his response was out. He said, oh, it's in the book. Can you tell me about that?
I mean, those people like Doris Day's kid.
Right.
I can't remember his name, or
the Beach Boys.
And I mean, Charles Manson was jamming with those guys. I mean, he was part of that scene.
So they were embarrassed by that, in the very least.
Absolutely. And everybody tried to distance themselves from Charles Manson when it came out what Charlie was about.
So anyone that O'Neill would want to talk to would not want to talk to him by definition, almost.
I had a lot of doors slammed in my face investigating the Franklin scandal. People that got burned, a lot of people got burned by Franklin, and they didn't want to talk to me about it.
Got it. So that goes with the territory then.
Yeah, definitely. Our CI was fascinated with LSD and what we could do with it.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
We were the biggest buyer of LSD. Our government was the biggest buyer.
I thought I got the impression from Chaos that that the CIA controlled all of it.
Well, what happened was we stole, I think it was Sandoz.
It was Sandoz.
And we stole the recipe so we could make it in Ohio. One of the big pharmas was making it in Ohio.
But so when I was a kid doing acid, was I getting the acid ultimately from the CIA?
I don't know. I grew up in Minneapolis, and Clyde Bellecourt, who was the head of the American Indian movement, was busted with like 10,000 hits of LSD. Right. I know that there were chemists in the reservations in upstate Minnesota that were making it.
Okay.
And I believe that's where I was getting it from when I was a kid.
Interesting. So I got in a little scuffle with the authorities. Nothing serious, but when remember the Skripal poisoning?
Yeah.
In Britain. So they said this is uniquely Russian technology. And at this point, I'd started to, I doubted our government for a very long time, but at this point, they had to prove to me they were not lying. And that probably wouldn't even do it. I assume they're lying if their lips are moving. But they said, oh, this uniquely Russian technology. And I looked at the structure of the nerve gas agent. And I said, this is stupid. So on Twitter, I said, look, whoever says this is uniquely Russian technology is a liar. I was the only organic chemist to call out that bullshit. There was one hint of a guy who I happen to know in Britain who kind of hinted at that, but I was the only one who said, look, it's complete horseshit. So next thing I know, I'm at George Galloway's show and I'm Al Jazeera is calling, stuff like that. And they're trying to get me to say who did. I said, what I'm telling you is it's so simple that anyone, any country in the world has the technology to make this stuff. They might die trying because the final product might knock them out. But so what I did is I actually gave it as an exam question in my course. I said, you got to make this, you got to make it in 3 steps. How would you do it? Everyone got full credit. It was that easy. The risk of these kind of compounds is that they're so easy to make that someone could inadvertently make one, not realizing it's a nerve agent. And then they would die right away. But so the Skripal story totally fell apart. And then finally, the Porton Down guys, the British Secret Service, the British group that does chemical weapons shit, that happens to be 8 miles from where the Skripals got poisoned, they would not claim it was Russian technology. And I don't know if the fact that I was out there barking and getting interviewed made them say, okay, you know, we've kind of been busted on that bit of reasoning or not. But so I've never been bashful about calling stuff out. Do you think when you're talking about this stuff, are you somewhat protected by the fact that no one wants to sue you because they don't want to go through discovery? I've wondered about that.
Oh, absolutely.
So discovery would be a nightmare.
Boys Town is extremely litigious. They sued. There was a organization that rated charities, and they downgraded them from like an A to a B, and Boys Town sued them. Boys Town is very litigious. But discovery with me, with all the stuff that I ended up, all the documentation, thousands and thousands of pages of documents, there's no way that I was going to be sued because if the discovery process was fair and equal, there was no way that anybody was going to sue me.
That's why you can say anything you want about Fauci, for example, because you sure wouldn't want to put Fauci at all through the discovery process.
And that's what the guys at TriDay got, because I'd meet with publishers in New York and they would just say libel, 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 libel. And
right.
I said, these guys cannot afford the discovery process. You do not have to worry about that, but they just didn't get it.
What about the risk of so you write about something and there's all these players and one of them you get wrong? That guy could raise holy hell, right?
Well, the trick with that is you don't get anything wrong.
But that is a trick.
And
that is a trick.
With my reporting, precision is very important to me.
Well, that's one of the reasons when you said want to do a podcast, I said, oh my God, yes. Because I wanted to know what your experiences were.
Well, I really enjoyed getting to know you, Dave.
Well, we can do it again.